Ms. Godfrey, we show you registered as Lauren Godfrey on behalf of State Auditors and the State Auditor's Office, and that you will be testifying neutrally. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right, thank you. And Mr. Hicks, we show you registered as Willie Hicks on behalf of the State Auditor's Office, and that you will be testifying neutrally. Is that correct?
That is correct.
All right, thank you both for being here. Go ahead.
Okay. Good afternoon, Chairman and members. My name is Lauren Godfrey, and I'm an Assistant State Auditor with the State Auditor's Office. And with me today is Willie Hicks, and we're going to give you kind of a brief overview of what our office does, and then talk a little bit about some of our recent audit results. Starting on page 1 of your handout, the State Auditor's Office has 4 main functions. Our primary function is, of course, audit and review, and we can conduct audits of any entity that receives state funds. We conduct those audits in accordance with a set of professional standards, and most of our work is conducted at state agencies and universities. The State Classification Office also resides within the Auditor's Office, and they maintain the state's compensation and classification system, including the state's classification plan. And that team analyzes the state workforce and supports agencies and universities' HR offices. We also have a professional development function that provides continuing professional education opportunities to auditors and accountants across the state and local government workforce. And then finally, our investigations group maintains our hotline for fraud reporting and investigates allegations of illegal activity involving entities that receive state funds. So moving on to page 2 of your handout, I wanted to point out that the volume of complaints that our fraud hotline has received increased 17% between fiscal year 23 and fiscal year 24. And among those complaints, we're seeing an upward trend related to state contracting. Contracting is something we consider to be a significant risk for state government, and we continue to address those risks on our audits. Specifically, for contract planning and procurement, we've identified risk related to preserving competition, particularly when it comes to state entities' sole sourcing contracts and conflicts of interest. For contract formation and award, we're looking to see that contracts are designed to protect the state's interests with things like clearly defined deliverables and performance measures. And we're also looking to make sure that contracts have mechanisms for resolving vendors' failure to perform with things like liquidated damages. For contract management and oversight, we design our audit procedures to address risks around monitoring vendor performance, payments, and then just general oversight of each entity's contracting function. Recently, we had audit findings related to a state entity not having a process to associate payments with purchase orders, and as a result, they could not always determine how much they had paid out on any one contract or if their total payments for any one contract exceeded the contract's maximum value. In addition, we consistently have findings related to state entities' monitoring of its contractors, which directly relates to how the state knows it got what it paid for. Continuing on to page 3 of your handout, you'll see some highlights related to the results of our audit of medical services for inmates provided by the University of Texas Medical Branch at Galveston. This audit was required by Rider coming out of the last legislative session. And as part of this audit, we identified $1.7 million paid out in unallowable cost. But our primary finding was that the contract between UTMB and the Department of Criminal Justice and the Juvenile Justice Department provided minimal guidance on areas that significantly affected program costs, such as employee compensation and off-site medical services. UTMB's contracts were structured such that all financial risk was placed on TDCJ and TJJD, and it did not create any incentive for UTMB to control its major costs, since the contracts explicitly require both TDCJ and TJJD to cover any deficit identified upon UTMB's fiscal year end. As an example of UTMB not controlling its costs, we identified that UTMB recovered a portion of its institution-wide indirect cost twice, once through the application of a contractual indirect cost rate, and then again through medical claim reimbursements. I want to point out that UTMB disagreed with our characterization of their practice, but did not provide any evidence to support its claim. Moving on to page 4, you'll see the results of our audit at the Texas Civil Commitment Office. This audit was also required by Rider coming out of the last session. Our findings related to the Civil Commitment Office itself were relatively minor. However, the Health and Human Services Commission provides mental health services to the Civil Commitment Office's clients, and we found that the commission overpaid its mental health services contractor by $242,000, which equates to about 26% of that contract's value. Those overpayments were related to duplicate payments of invoices, payments for expenses already covered by another contract, payments for expenses that exceeded contractual maximums, and some unallowable expenses such as staff lunches. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Willie, who's going to discuss the results of some of our other recent work.
Representative King.
I know before you run, though,
Okay.
because I just learned about today, the Texas Civil Commitment Office.
Yes.
I bet no one up here knows what it does. And I think people who are listening are kind of be maybe grossed out or something that we spent over $242,000 too much for what kind of people are there?
So the folks that reside in there used to be called violent sex offenders. So there are folks that have been released from prison, and a court has deemed them not safe to return to the community, and they are civilly committed, and they reside in a facility that's run by the Civil Commitment Office.
Right on. I bet Mr. Curry's got a pretty big backhoe. We could take care of this, but that's fine. All right. Thank you, ma'am.
Sure.
Good afternoon, members. My name is Willie Hicks. I'm an audit manager with the State Auditor's Office. In addition to the reports that Lauren has discussed, I'd like to discuss this report as well as the next report on page 6. On this page, we're talking about a review of continuity restoration services that was required by the last session. This report was released in November of 2024. The primary inefficiency that we identified in this report was related to the limited availability of beds for individuals that are on the wait list for competency restoration services. We found that was compounded by the fact of the COVID-19 pandemic and the challenges that they were having with staffing key medical positions in state hospitals such as nurses and psychiatrists. But we did find that there are alternative programs that are available that helps individuals that are on the wait list receive those services while they're waiting. But we found that those programs are not offered in all counties throughout the state. Additionally, we did also look at demographics related to the people on the wait list, and we found that for those individuals, we did not see any significant disparities in the wait time for those individuals, whether it's based on race, gender, ethnicity, or age. Going on to the next page. On this page, we have a report on selected performance measures at the Texas Facilities Commission. And just a little background about performance measures. Every state agency has to develop performance measures as part of their strategic plan. The performance measures they develop are intended to help them evaluate either the efficiency, effectiveness, or the delivery of the service that they provide. The measures they come up with a methodology for calculating that measure, and they report those measures directly to the Legislative Budget Board on a periodic basis, whether annually or quarterly. Our office goes in and we basically certify the accuracy of that measure that's been reported to LBB. And for this audit, when we took a look at the Texas Facilities Commission's performance measures, we found that they had significant weaknesses in the controls over their process for reporting performance measures. The 5 measures that we selected for testing were designated as factors preventing certification. This basically meant we were unable to recalculate those measures because the Texas Facilities Commission either did not have accurate populations of information that they used to calculate the measure, or they did not use accurate costs for the measures they calculated, or they did not follow the definition that they defined for calculating that measure, which was reported to LBB. We did make recommendations on our findings. They agreed with our recommendations. However, we did want to note that in their management responses, they disagreed. Well, I'm sorry, it's not that they disagreed. They asserted that there was a material difference of opinion related to how measures were calculated. And they also asserted that, They also asserted that the information that was related to our findings did not materially affect the outcome of their calculations. We did provide them a follow-up comment in their responses, and in that follow-up comment, we acknowledged that, We included in our follow-up comments in those responses and clarified that the testing was based on the Commission's support and documentation, and it was not based on any additional information other than what they provided. Additionally, that the work that we perform is not based on any auditor expectations, but simply based on the information they provide for calculating those measures and the supporting documentation. That concludes our prepared remarks.
First of all, members, do you have any questions? Okay. I'll do Representative Curry.
Yes, thank y'all very much for coming. You know I'm a fan. I do appreciate what you do, and I think you'll appreciate that we're going to lean more on you on future subjects, I'm sure. So I think one of the things that, obviously, we're looking for inefficiencies everywhere we can. Y'all, you do lots of audits on lots of different things, and one of the things I'm interested in is your opinion on the inefficiencies that you see across the board in agencies. I mean, you see everything, you see a lot, right? And so, granted, you know, you're in the situation that you're in, and we want as much information as we can get. But what inefficiencies do you see that are large dollar inefficiencies? I'm not saying I'm not looking for $242,000, but I'm looking for $240 million at a time or $1 billion at a time.
So what I would say would be that the evaluation of whether something is happening efficiently or inefficiently is more of a policy judgment. That being said, we continue to identify significant risks in state contracting and also in IT.
And when you say risks in IT, are you speaking specifically of cyber risks? Or are you speaking of?
I would say generally IT, especially cyber risks.
Okay. So can you elaborate on the IT piece?
Sure. So I don't want to say too much and compromise anyone's IT security, but most of our audits include some IT component, and we do have significant findings in that space. Sometimes can be about IT security, so doing things like patching. Can also be about, we often look at user access and making sure that agencies are appropriately limiting employees' access to sensitive information, and that they're getting employees' access removed when they separate from the agency. We have findings in that space. Do you think of anything else? Significant. Those are the big ones that we're always doing. We've recently done a series of confidential data audits, and those reports are all confidential for obvious reasons, but
Sure.
we could definitely provide the reports to you if you're interested.
Well, I
in
guess
them.
that kind of leads me to my next question is, I think you'd have to agree with me when you go through the budget and look at LBB's reports and so on and so forth, that overwhelming majority of our money is spent on goods and services and not necessarily on people, right? It's equipment, goods, services, all the things necessary in the state. And that's not just in the state level, it's in local, you know, all the the taxpayer-funded entities, correct? So with that being the case, when you're doing your auditing, do you focus down tightly on the expenditures in those agencies and the expenditures in these programs?
Yes. So a lot of the work that we do is required by state law. And then we have some latitude with whatever resources we have left. So we have a risk assessment process that we use to try to figure out where we'll do our audits. But most audits have some financial component. Say we were doing solely an IT security audit, we might not be looking at how much they're paying their IT employees or how much they're paying their IT contractors. But almost all audits, we do have some financial component.
So who would be the one that would audit? I mean, it's a new program, but Operation Lone Star, we've got, I think, $11 billion that has been put through it and spent through it so far as the number I've heard. Who would be the one that would actually audit those expenditures and look for the fraud and waste and the efficiency of how it's managed?
So we have the authority to audit that, and we could audit how the money was spent, but we wouldn't render a judgment about whether the money was spent wastefully. That's more of a policy judgment.
So who would do that?
I think we could, our goal is to provide you the information so that state leaders could make that kind of judgment.
Okay. And who would ask for that audit?
the Legislative Audit Committee or any member of the legislature could request an audit.
Okay, all right. And I guess you could ask for an audit on operations, you can ask for an audit on lots of different things, correct? And that would ultimately go through your office, correct?
Correct. The state auditor makes the decision about what audits we proceed with, but we get requests from members all the time.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Rodriguez-Ramos.
Thank you, Chairman. So it kind of goes along what my colleague was asking. And so you mentioned the two biggest areas are IT and contracting. So those are the third-party contractors of different agencies. You're able to go in there and audit those even if they're private entities or?
So we can. Typically, most of our work is done at the state agency or universities. We do have the authority to go in and audit vendors that are receiving state funds, but our work in that space is pretty limited. For a while, there was some legislative interest, for example, in Medicaid and the managed care organizations. So we did go in and engage audits at managed care organizations, and we did a series of audits related to that. That's in recent memory, that's the thing we've done outside of a state entity.
Why is it limited? You said it's mostly limited. Why is it? Because of lack of request on auditing those, or is it what?
I
What's the
think
purpose?
that I would just say that, most of, we're looking at state entities and then how they're managing and how they're monitoring the use of those funds, that ultimately that's the state entity's responsibility to monitor their vendor, and we're coming in to evaluate how they're doing that.
Okay. And I see on one of your documents here, it says the investigation results are reported to prosecution authorities as appropriate. So I understand you don't make any judgment calls, you just present the facts, and then it's up to the agency, or what's an example of when something has actually gone from your investigation to actually the agency or whoever referring that to actual? Have y'all had incidences like that or examples of that?
So that's a tough question for me to answer.
Okay.
We keep audit very separate from investigations, and that is so we can not compromise the integrity of the investigation. It is correct that we don't have any sort of civil or criminal authority, right? So we do our investigations group does conduct investigations, and then they'll refer to the appropriate law enforcement authority. I'm not sure if that answers your question or not.
Yeah, but could you give me an example of when an agency or you've provided that information, and then what it looks like when an agency or somebody gets that information and actually pursues enforcement? Like, what would have you ever had a case where, I understand you guys are removed from any enforcement piece of it, but where an agency looks at the information you provided and said, whoa, there's been some fraud and abuse here, there's some criminal action that we need to pursue here?
So let me think about this. I can give you one. Okay, I'm going to call up our general counsel if that's okay.
It might be okay, hold on.
She should be registered as a resource.
Are you registered?
I'm registered. My name's Kathleen Day. It's Kat Day. I'm the general counsel for the state auditor's office. So,
And do the whole thing. So we show you registered as Kathleen Day, and that you are here registered on behalf of the Texas State Auditor's Office, and that you'll be testifying neutrally. Is that correct?
yes.
All right, go ahead.
So, like Lauren was saying, since she is in audit, we do have that internal wall. And outside of our investigations team, only the state auditor, the chief of staff, and myself actually have access to this information.
Okay.
So that's why she was hedging a little bit. But how it generally works is when we receive a complaint, we determine whether or not we have jurisdiction or if another agency has primary jurisdiction. So, for example, when we get a complaint related to child support, that's going to go to the Attorney General's office. Medicaid fraud, that's also at the Attorney General's office. If there's a complaint against a state employee or an elected official, that will go to the Public Integrity Unit at DPS. So that's the first step. And then if we see that the complaint has criminal allegations, we move forward with opening an investigation plan, and we spend months, sometimes years, developing that plan and kind of putting it together with a bow and then going to a local DA and telling that DA, here's what we think is the crime that's been committed, go ahead and prosecute. And so really it's up to the DA and the prosecutorial discretion to determine whether or not to move forward. And sometimes DAs, after we have completed an investigation, aren't interested in moving forward, but we've done our due diligence under our statute.
Fascinating. Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Members, any other questions? Representative Bowers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for your testimony. I just have a couple of questions. The first one deals with wanting to know, did the audit reveal any best practices or areas where the commission is performing well in terms of performance measure management?
Facilities Commission?
Performing well.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have the details on that, but we do have someone here from that project that can share more of the details on it.
Is she registered?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Okay. All right, Ms. Eckford, we show you registered as Hillary Eckford on behalf of the State Auditor's Office, and that you'll be testifying neutrally. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Good deal. Anybody else want to speak?
Would you like me to repeat the question?
Yes, please, that would be wonderful.
Okay, so it says, did the audit reveal any best practices or areas where the commission is performing well in terms of performance measure management?
We selected 5 key performance measures to review, and all 5 of those performance measures we reviewed looked at significant weaknesses we identified.
Okay. And so then, based on your findings, what do you consider to be the most urgent recommendations for the commission to implement and to improve its performance measuring reporting?
It's an excellent question. We have recommendations in both of the chapters here related to both defining their measure definitions clearly and following those definitions, as well as using accurate data to calculate those. And I would say categorize both of those as very significant.
So pages 7 and 8 of your report,
I believe so, yes, ma'am.
and then if you could really deliver to my office any more pointed answers on your data, that would be great.
Absolutely. We can look into that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative King. And then
Lauren, it's gonna be a question for you. And I think you may know where we're going because it's been something my office is really interested in. And I want to ask you a little more about the Waste Fraud Abuse Hotline. Correct me if I'm wrong, is that the origins of that is in the General Appropriations Act, right? It's only there as a rider. Would it be helpful if legislation was done? I mean, I think it'd be nice if we gave you legislative guidance on the hotline.
I'm going to punt that to our general counsel.
So we're not going to take a position on any
Okay.
policy choice, but I would say we would find that very helpful.
Have you, he's not here right now. I believe Representative Alcott's staff's working on it, so you want to talk to him. Are those, how long does your office maintain those records for anonymous complaints?
2 years.
2 years, okay. Why only 2 years?
That's the records retention requirement.
Okay, and that's state statute, that's a policy or rule the board adopted?
That, I believe, is in the Texas Administrative Code.
All right, so some bureaucrats did it, not us, okay. Does the state's auditor's office have any oversight regarding fraud, waste, or abuse in higher ed?
Generally, no. We refer all those to the university's internal audit division.
All right, so that's where I want to ask you about. I'm going to read it it's from House Bill 1, guys. This is our General Appropriations Act. Section 7.09, fraud reporting. A state agency or institution of higher education appropriated funds by this act shall use those funds to assist with detection and reporting of fraud involving state funds by providing information on the homepage of their website on how to do it by you guys. And then it says it's got to be for all agencies, including higher ed. But when I go to higher websites, they've got their own fraud reporting tool and then a link to y'all's website. So when people report fraud, waste, and abuse to, let's say, UT's link, does the state auditor's office get a hold of that information?
To my knowledge, no. Not automatically.
So that's interesting. I don't know. We've got like 89-something universities. they've got their own thing going on, and I was curious if it was to confirm it, that the state auditor's office isn't being informed of that. Okay. I think that's helpful. We're done. Thank you.
Representative Alders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I think I'm actually piggybacking off of Representative Kane, because we heard from Sunset Advisory Board this morning that universities are exempt from the sunset process, but the state auditor's office is the one that holds institutions of higher education accountable. So is that the case? Do y'all do audits on higher ed?
We do.
Okay, how does that process work? How often is that done?
So some audits of higher education institutions are required by statute. I'm sure you're well aware of Senate Bill 17 from the last session. So we just completed an audit at all the Texas A&M institutions related to the implementation of those requirements.
Okay.
In addition, as I mentioned earlier, we have a robust risk assessment process. So as we identify risks in that space, we engage higher education institutions just on an ad hoc basis. One of the findings I mentioned in my presentation about the entity that wasn't associating payments for their contracts with purchase orders, that was at the University of Texas at El Paso.
Okay, so there's not a process or a plan by which y'all go every 6 years, decade, whatever, you automatically do an audit. It just
That's correct.
is
There's
it
no process.
ad hoc
So
basis.
if it's not, unless it's required by statute,
Okay.
it would just be based on risk.
And can an audit be requested at any time by a member of the legislature?
Yes.
Okay. And then another question, I understand that the state auditor's office state classification team oversees the state's position classification plan. And each agency and institution of higher education implements that classification plan through their human resources division based on employees' assigned duties and position descriptions. Do you have an estimate of how many state employees could be misclassified based on actual duties performed rather than assigned according to the classification code?
I'm not offhand. I can check with our team and see if they can get a number like that. I do know we do conduct reviews at agencies periodically, and we take a look at a certain set of positions and review those folks' job duties to evaluate whether they've been properly classified.
Okay, yeah, it'd be great to get that information. Thank you.
Representative Bowers.
Bless you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you. I had a whole nother question, and I really didn't know who it was supposed to go to, like my colleague here, Mr. Kane. But now I have a whole nother question now that SB 17 has entered the space. So, and I'm taking a deep breath because this is really, hard for me to answer or ask, because I know that SB 17 deals with DEI, and at our institutions of higher learning, so many people now have lost jobs based on maybe work that you all have done. So I'm just wondering how we keep that part from, happening. That when we look at savings, cost savings, and this is a question that our chairman knows that I have, but when we look at cost savings, how do we get away from equating, and the way I put it is people's worthwhile work with waste? And especially when it deals with DEI, spelled out diversity, equity, and inclusion, and those programs benefit people of color, and a lot of times the most vulnerable and those in need. So how do we get away from, because I want to be on this committee, right? And I believe that we can do a great work in here in a bipartisan way to make sure this state is saving money. But when it means that people are going to lose jobs or benefits, that's where I have great concern. So I need to know from you all if your audits constituted the loss of jobs.
So our audit, as required by the legislation, was only to evaluate how universities were spending state dollars that they received and making sure they were not spending them in conflict with that legislation. As far as what the legislation says, that's up to this body.
Of course.
So we focus solely on what we were asked to do.
And I get that, and I appreciate that, but you have to understand my concern, and as a black woman, even asking this, because naturally people are concerned, especially and when it's at our institutions of higher learning. Some of those institutions were thinking, well, we're going to change the name of those titles, right? It is very concerning because when it comes to DEI, DEI, we've been heard could be considered definitely earned it, not diversity, equity, and inclusion. A lot of people of color are highly educated when they get these jobs. So that's why I want to go to definitely earned it. And I don't want to ask you all based on feelings how you felt, but you have to know that these people lost their jobs. And we're going to say that people are going to lose access to benefits if we get to a place where we're just, cutting funding and cutting people's jobs. And I really do believe, for me, it came clear because it sounds like people's worthwhile work, again, is considered waste, and that should not be how we save costs.
So as far as jobs that were lost, that would be a question for the universities. That was not what we evaluated as a part of our audit. I will tell you that we only found 2 instances of noncompliance with the implementation of those requirements in our audit. The first was at Texas A&M Central Texas, I believe, and it was related to a contract. And then the other was at McLennan Community College, and that was related to a new employee training video.
Can you speak into the mic?
Oh.
You're fine now, but just know that you want that.
Absolutely.
And so, thank you. So what was that, McLennan Community College?
McLennan Community College.
And what was it? What job?
It was related to a new hire training video.
And so the training video, did it deal with DEI, the training of,
Yes.
Well, you have answered my questions. Thank you. Thank you.
Representative Troxclair.
Thank you so much for the work that you do. So are these considered performance audits? Do you perform both financial audits and performance audits?
We do.
Okay. And then once you have findings, that these things are high risk or need to be addressed, you get a response from the agency or the department and how they're going to address it. What is the follow-up to ensure that the things have been addressed?
So we have a process by which we request annually for state agencies or state entities to continue to report to us their status of the implementation of our recommendations. And then the next time we're going around to audit that entity, we include that as part of our audit scope to verify implementation.
And when you say the next time we go around to that entity, what does that mean?
It could be, if it's at HHSC, we're there often, so
Okay.
We'd be looking at the audit. The last audit we issued and verify the implementation of those recommendations. Some smaller entities were at much less frequently.
And do you generally find that the recommendations have been fully implemented by the time you circle back?
I would say usually fully or substantially implemented.
Okay. And what happens when they're not?
All we can do is report that it hasn't been implemented
Who do you report to?
To the legislature in our public audit reports.
Okay. And previously, hopefully we'll be hearing more from you in this committee, but it's just in a report that's delivered to offices? Or
No,
is
all of our audit reports are public.
But there's not a hearing, there hasn't been a committee, there's not
Not to my
something where those
We send it
findings
to the
are.
Legislative Audit Committee, and then after we send it to the Legislative Audit Committee, it goes to all representatives and all senators.
Okay. Oh, the audit committee. So it is highlighted in person to a legislative body.
It's given to the Audit Committee, yes.
Okay. Will this committee, would you mind making sure that this committee receives, and that we know when there's a finding that things haven't been implemented?
Yes, of course.
Okay, great. And then just generally, you receive do you feel like you have the capacity to investigate and or audit the things that require that there's a judgment made that there's something to be looked at there? Or is it we get a lot of requests, a lot of complaints, and only a small fraction of what likely needs to be looked at is looked at?
Honestly, it depends on the year. Last legislative session, y'all know our work and the integrity and the independence and really value it, and so you gave us more work, which we're very appreciative of, but as a result, we had less hours that we could designate for those discretionary audits where we saw risk across the state. So we did less of those audits last legislative session, but we're doing more of them this year. So it really ebbs and flows depending on how much statutorily required work we have.
Okay. And then my last question is, there is a relatively new provision in state code that deals with independent school district audits, performance audits. Those are done by you, or they're done by somebody else?
No, they're not done by us. We have very limited jurisdiction when it comes to auditing school districts. It's only the foundation school program funds, and so we can't go in and audit just a district's financials.
And is that because of a statutory restriction?
We're limited to state funds, yes.
And ISDs?
Is usually county funds.
I think the states. Well, so is there an opportunity? My evaluation on those audits so far is that they are uninformative of what we were really looking for when it comes to potential waste, fraud, abuse. And I would be interested in talking to you more about whether it would be the proper role of the state auditor to take that on rather than an independent contractor who may not understand what we're really looking for.
I think if there were some statutory changes that we could be able to do that work.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Representative Tinderholt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm sorry, I'm going to cover some stuff I know you already did. I had a meeting, and I'm sorry that I missed part of this. And so if this question's already asked, just either tell me you already answered it or give me a real brief answer. Is that fair? Because I want to save time. So I know that we did an open records request, and we got some stuff that was turned in on the hotline. You already talked a little bit about that. I talked to Briscoe. And I understand that I thought it was 1 year, but after 2 years, you guys delete that stuff. Is that true?
Yes, we keep our complaints for 2 years.
So when you close them, when you close something successfully, you close it so that we don't have access, kind of, right? Is that?
Yes, it's deleted.
And if it's still open, we can see it.
Yes.
So I want to cover two things. Because we here doing what we do, we should be interested in trends, right? So can we get access to the stuff you've closed so that we can see the trends over the last, say, 4 or 6 years? So I know there are thousands, but let's say there's 100, and half of them are closed. So for the last 6 years, call it 300. Can we get access to all the ones that were closed so we can? It's not so much the individual ones we're looking for. I think what we're looking for is trends, and we're also looking for trends of agencies that have a lot. And then I don't know how the whistleblower stuff works, but if someone said they want to be a whistleblower, we have to look and see whether we can still get access to that to see who they are. And then we're going to want the access to the ones that are still open. So can you tell me why they remain open?
We have an active investigation if they're open.
And how long does the average investigation take?
Depending on the complexities of the matter, it could be anywhere from 6 months to a couple years.
Okay, and I'll be honest with you guys, we're looking for long-term stuff, and we're looking for low-hanging fruit on where we can cut stuff. And the fact that you already have these reports is great, right? That people turn stuff in. So if we could get a report from you guys over whatever period you think, is it 4 years, is it 6, is it 10? I'm going to let you guys dictate the term, right? I don't want 2 though.
so that we can see trends of agencies, trends of the types of complaints. So we'd like the closed ones and the open ones. Is that a fair ask?
Unfortunately, everything older than 2 years is deleted. We don't have access
Totally
to
deleted?
It is totally deleted.
Our super IT rock stars that were here earlier today can't undelete them and get access to them?
We don't have that ability. And then regarding open investigations, if we have something that we are trying to bring to a DA somewhere, we have to ensure that we don't compromise that investigation by sharing those details. And so we really try to limit the folks who know. I'm sorry, I could hear it went out. We really try to limit the access to those open investigations that we're bringing to DAs, because that means that you could potentially be called as a witness at a grand jury summons. And so we're very, when representatives ask for updates on investigations, we try to keep it, as vague as possible, just so that we don't compromise the integrity of the matter. But we are more than willing to figure out how to work around those boundaries and get you all the information that you're looking for.
I think the intent of the committee, I don't think that we want to harm anything that you guys are currently doing. So I think the data that we get is the data that you can release. And then once something is closed, I think that us working closely with you guys would be really important. And then I want to make a statement to the committee about it. I think that our committee should have a reportable place for fraud, waste, and abuse, and whether someone wants to be a whistleblower or not. So that we can get access to this kind of stuff without all the formalities of the stuff. And then when we get stuff that people report, we can say, hey, did you report this to these guys? So we can make sure that people are reporting to you as well. Let me ask this. Are there things we're not asking for that you think we should have in order to root out fraud, waste, and abuse, and to be more effective? Are there things that we should be asking for from you guys that you have that we're not asking for? And you can even take it as a rhetorical question and go back and talk to your people. The goal is to get access to stuff so we can save taxpayers, we can save time, we can be effective, and we can be efficient with the government that we have. And so I would think about that and go back and talk to the folks and find out, are there things that we're not providing to this committee that we could, that would help? And this isn't about blame game. It's not about somebody feeling bad that maybe their agency is being doing fraud, things that are wasteful. Now, fraud they should be worried about. But if there's wasteful things that are happening. So I think that's more my statement is I hope that we can work really closely with you guys, because you guys will have tons of things that we can create efficiencies for. Do you agree with that?
Our role is to be as helpful to the legislature as possible.
Do you think the relationship could be, do you think a close relationship with what you guys do could help us root out fraud, waste, and abuse?
I think there's some overlap for sure in our role as the state auditor's office.
Okay, thank you.
Members, are there any other questions? Did you have a question? Okay, Representative Curry.
Yeah, this is kind of a point of clarification, but I really just want to ask some very specific question back to Representative Troxler's question. So have you ever seen an instance where you were able to get data from an entity that we send state funds to in order to, in the course of an audit?
Yes.
Okay, so technically, whether it's a school system or whatever it may be, or grant program or so on and so forth, if we've sent state money into something, we have a right to understand how that money was used, correct?
We have a right to understand how that exact money is used. We don't have a right to go in and audit all of that entity's financials.
Okay, I get that. So next question then, if they commingled the funds with local taxpayer money, then how do you separate your favorite egg from the omelet?
You know, if that happened, I think we would likely not be able to move forward with looking at those funds. We wouldn't be able to trace them and see where they went to.
I might disagree with that. Okay, thank you.
Okay, I have a couple questions too, if that's okay. So I want to start with the audit on the Office of Civil Commitment, and the way I understand that is there was a payment. There's a private vendor, right? And their contract is about $1 million or something like that. And HHSC was involved a little bit, I guess, in terms of deciding whether to pay or not pay that. But at the end of the day, we, the state, overpaid by about $250,000, plus or minus, on a $1 million contract.
Correct.
All right, so I have a few questions. So one, when we overpaid, did they give us the money back?
According to HHSC, they got most of it back. And at the time, as our audit was concluding, they said there was about $7,000 that they were still working to get back.
Okay. Now, did they get it returned back after they asked and after the audit, or did they get it?
It was as a result of the audit they pursued.
Okay. So there's this vendor who got $250,000 extra,
Correct.
and they just waited until the audit was done before they got it back.
Correct.
Before we got it back. Okay. So in this audit, of this forensic audit, why did you decide to do an audit of this particular, of this office?
It was required by Ryder.
Okay, so there's a rider that said go out and do it. So there was a heads up a little bit,
True.
right? About a 1 year heads up?
Actually, I think it's, well, I guess the budget.
5 months?
Yeah, about 5 months. We started in September following the end of the session.
Okay. So it's a 5 months heads up, but it wasn't until after the audit that the money came back. Okay. So how many contracts does this Office of Civil Commitment have? Or how many contracts did you look at under this forensic audit? Plus or minus? I'm not.
So they have one really big contract.
Right.
And that's with Management Training and Corporation.
Yep.
And that they run the facility that all of the office.
So there's one
clients
contract,
reside.
essentially.
There's a few other smaller ones, but that's the big one. Right.
There's one contract that's 97% of it, and it was wrong by about 25%.
Well, that's a different contract. So
Okay.
there's one contract between the Civil Commitment Office
And HHSC.
and MTC,
Oh, and
and then
MTC.
there's another contract between HHSC and MTC.
Okay.
And they're for different purposes.
Okay. Well, I guess it's fair to say that you looked a little bit and saw a lot.
Yeah.
Okay. How long does that forensic audit take you?
We started in September, and our report was released in early July.
Okay. So, what happened? Why was there? And I know the overpayment was done for several reasons, like something duplicated. But the bulk of it was an invoice mistake, right?
Mm-hmm.
So can you tell us exactly what happened with this invoice mistake?
So for the duplicate payments, there are controls in CAPS to prevent duplicate payments, but the invoice numbers were not entered correctly. So that control was bypassed, and as a result, the invoices were paid more than once.
So a person typed in the wrong number.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. So I want to talk a second about this other one, which is the Facilities Commission, I guess. I don't know where it is. But on the Facilities Commission, also there was an audit, and some things were not certified, which from what I understand, I'm just looking at the front sheet, is average number of days to respond to a maintenance request, okay? So there's an average number of days of maintenance request, and I've heard this comment a few times, not just from you, but from others, about data not being accurate. Okay, what does that mean in this case?
I'm going to turn that over to Hillary.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I'm happy to clarify. The maintenance requests, in their measure definition, they specified in that definition that preventative maintenance requests should be excluded from that calculation. So when they're in their data, they have all of their maintenance requests in there, but they also have preventative maintenance requests in there, like baiting rodent traps or changing the air filter, things like that. Those type of things should have been excluded from their calculations, and they didn't have a way to exclude that from their data when they made those calculations.
Okay, so when you did this audit and this definition problem, was this definition problem, did it happen before, or did we just, like, was it right before in previous years? Like, when you go back and you look at the metrics that I guess is part of the budget or whatever, we want to know that, hey, how's the Facilities Commission doing? So here are some things we want to know. How long is it taking for a ticket to be resolved? How many square feet are being maintained? And what is the cost for whatever per square foot? So these are all metrics that have been there, I'm assuming, for a while.
I believe so, yes.
Okay, so this may have been wrong for a long time, right?
Our audit focused on the FY24 data, but the system that they have used to calculate this system has been around for many years.
Okay. And so does that mean that the metrics may not have been accurate again, to use that term, accurate ever?
I don't know the answer to that. I can speak to FY24, but the
Okay.
system has been in place for many years.
So has the difference in definition of that one been resolved now or no?
Not that I'm advised of, but the Facilities Commission may be able to answer that better.
Okay. So are most of the problems you saw on this, or what you were evaluating, were related to performance metrics? Is that what this particular audit was focused on, was making sure that the metrics matched?
Correct, for 5 key measures, yes, sir.
Okay. Did any of the performance metrics, I guess, fail? In other words, do we have a goal for certain performance metrics, or is it just to report the performance metrics?
It's just a report. In our page 2 of our actual report, we list the results that they reported in ABEST for those results. But unfortunately, we were not able to determine whether those numbers that were reported were accurate because of the factors that they had in their data.
And each one of these factors, was it a difference in definition, or was it or was it a problem in collecting that information, reporting? You know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, I guess if I put in the wrong number, I could say whatever 3 is the metric, and you're like, well, actually it's 2.5 because you added this other one, and that's kind of I guess a debate we have to have on which is the right one. But with some of it, just like that, just isn't the right data at all, no matter how you define it.
Correct. So we've characterized that as 2 of them were using inaccurate populations. The example of not pulling out the maintenance request or the preventative maintenance. There were another 2 that relied on incorrect cost data for those cost measures. Specifically, they were using 2018 costs to calculate their 24 costs. And so they were using inaccurate data.
There's a lot of things that changed between 2018 and 2024, especially when it comes
Yes,
to
sir.
cost, right? So, you don't know this, I guess, but did they use the 2018 numbers for 2023? Did they use the?
I don't know. I only know to FY24.
Would you be able to ask them, or is this like something I have to ask? Because I guess what I'm saying is, why did they use 2018 numbers? Is it just whatever, they have an Excel sheet and they don't change the 2018 and they just added another row and kept doing it? Or did it change from being a 2022 number to a 2018 number?
I'm not advised on that. It did look like the spreadsheet they were using, because it was a spreadsheet, did include 2018 numbers, and we brought that to their attention during our audit.
So what happens when you change it to the right numbers? What happens to that metric?
We weren't provided the 2024 cost data.
Or 2023 or 2022?
That's correct.
Okay. Do they have to ever provide it, or just?
I don't know, sir.
Okay. All right, I have another question. Well, maybe 10 more. But on UTMB, so let's talk about that one for a second. So in that one, there's these unallowable costs that were paid, I guess. And I guess one way you could look at it is a small percentage. The other way you could look at it is over $1 million. Okay? So when this information is entered as, I guess, an expense that they want to get paid, right? So they have, okay, this one's easy, this was a contract, and this is the contract number, so you need to pay that. But then there's other things, like you said, flowers and lunches or whatever, that kind of stuff. Were those coded as that, or were they coded as something else, and then you realized that that was actually not something that was allowable, but it was not?
I hate to go back and forth, but Lauren will be able to help you
Okay,
with that
that's
one.
right.
We brought one more person.
Okay.
She's the
Oh,
expert
no.
on this
All
audit,
right,
if
well,
you
one of
don't
you have to
mind.
move then. All right.
I'm happy to.
This is Courtney Amberswade. She should have been registered as a resource as well.
Did I do this? Okay. All right. I'm going to mispronounce your name, but I'll try. Ms. Courtney Ambrose?
Yes.
Wade?
Yes.
So you're registered as Courtney Ambrose Wade on behalf of the State Auditor Office, and that you will be testifying neutrally. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
All right. Welcome to the team. So I want to know a little bit more about these UTMB
Okay.
expenses that maybe were unallowable.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess my question is, when they were issued as expenses, were they listed, first of all, were they listed correctly, as in this was a lunch and this was this, or were they coded as something different?
The expenses that you're referring to specifically, we identified through data analysis, and they were indeed coded that way. So we pulled supporting documentation. Well, we had all the data, and we just did a search for those terms, and those came up. We looked for the supporting documentation, like, yes, indeed. These were the type of expenditures incurred by the university, and we identified those.
So you did a search and said, search for whatever,
Yes.
Quattro Gatti or something. You went and looked for
Flowers.
restaurants and that kind of stuff. You manually decided to go and look, and you saw, okay, well, this is not
An allowable
This is not
expenditure.
allowable expense. This is a perfect place for AI, probably, right, to be able to go and help you do that kind of stuff. So, do you know if you found all the unallowable expenses?
Could
Do you know if you found all the unallowable expenses? I mean, unless you look at all of them, how do you know? I guess.
Well, we looked for our audit scope.
Okay.
So that was over a period of years. We're not 100% guaranteeing we identified, but we did use some data analysis techniques and some data tools, Power BI. We have a data solutions group in our office who assisted us to look at just the enormous amount of expenditures. So, through data analysis tools, that's how we identified that.
And if I may just clarify one thing, and correct me if I'm wrong, but so some of what you're seeing in that number was stuff that was just straight unallowable, like you shouldn't be buying that. But some of it was related to, like, a salary is a cost that would be allowable, but that individual salary maybe wasn't supporting the program. So
Sure.
then we factored that in as allowable. So there was kind of like two, so you couldn't just look at salaries and know.
We don't pay for lunches. That's unallowable. This, we're not supposed to pay. You could pay for salaries, but in this particular case, that wasn't the right salary to attach to it, or
Correct.
shouldn't have been attached
Yes.
to it. All right, so 3 years goes by. Kind of the same question as the first one. 2 or 3 years go by, and then you find out that somebody, I'm not even sure, where's the money going from? UTMB to, so who is this? TDCJ who is putting the unallowable expenses in, and UTMB reimbursed it, or the other way?
Vice versa.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's UTMB's expenses.
Okay, so did they pay them back?
At the time we concluded the audit, for these expenditures in particular, we had no knowledge of any expenses being paid back.
I would ask for it probably at this point, right? I mean, if they're not allowable, they should, the money needs to be set up. So most of it was it anything, I guess, why did people think it was allowable? Do you ask them, like, hey, why did you put flowers and gifts? And they're like, oh, I thought we could, or...
So the total number that we identified was 1.7, and $1 million of that was related to a policy billing initiative that UTMB had implemented institution-wide, and it impacted the correctional managed care program. So my understanding from discussions with UTMB is their interpretation of, fiscal impact was different than what our interpretation was in the contract. So the contract has a provision that says any financial impact to the program that exceeds $1 million needs to be approved by TDCJ. And this billing initiative that they implemented, they did not see it as one of those initiatives that needed to be approved. So we disagreed on that.
Okay, on some of it, but not all of it.
Right.
That's all I got for now. But we'll be talking again, I'm sure. Representative Troxler.
I just want to drill down and be really clear about what needs to be done to allow y'all to keep records for longer than 2 years. This is so concerning to me because, of course, the legislature only meets once every 2 years. And so we basically don't have the data that we need to know whether or not all of your work is being properly implemented. And so what needs to be changed? Is that something that can be changed administratively, internally? Does it take a legislative statute change or something that this committee can do?
Yeah, let me take a look at that and get back to you. I can't tell you off the top of my head.
Okay. And you do that, I think you mentioned it was the minimum required.
No, the 2 years is required via our records retention schedule, which is a requirement of all state agencies in the Administrative Procedure Act. But I will get back to you about those 2 years to see if there's anything we can do about that.
Okay, because if it is a minimum, there could maybe be just a policy change within the office that you would want to keep those records for longer than 2 years.
And to clarify, that's just for investigation records. When it comes to our audit work papers and all of our audit work, that is a much longer records retention.
Okay. still think the point remains. Thank you.
Representative Tinsley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So as I'm listening to this, there's a serious concern I have, which I think you could probably tell by his questioning, the chairman. How much estimate in a year do you find that's fraudulent or wrongful spending across state agencies?
That's not a number we calculate. I will say, when you're talking about fraud, that involves criminality, right? So in the course of an audit, if we got into a situation where we think fraud was occurring, the audit would stop and we'd move that information over to investigations, and then a criminal investigation would proceed.
But you don't track it after that?
So, I mean, I'll be honest, that doesn't happen all that often. As far as maybe things spent in non-compliance with contracts or statute, they're just identified in the individual report, so that's not a number we've aggregated.
So let me ask a different way. So when someone purchases something at the wrong cost, was I understanding that spreadsheet, someone was purchasing things at the wrong cost, or they were selling something at the wrong cost?
For you, the UTMB
Yes.
audit? Oh, sorry. There were purchases that were unallowed.
Okay. How often are we correcting or how often do we recover any of that money? If there were things that were wrongfully done, or maybe we purchased at the wrong price, or we paid too much, how often does the state or does your agency, how often do we recover money?
It varies from project to project. There were some instances in this audit in particular where we identified areas where, things were unallowable or inaccurately calculated, and UTMB credited back that amount to the contract immediately once it was brought to their attention. Sometimes that doesn't happen.
Why?
I don't know, maybe timing, at the agency, bureaucracy,
Who holds them
approvals.
who is the organization that would hold them accountable to rectify? Here's why I ask. I own a business. If there was fraud or wrongful payments, I would expect it to be paid back.
So broadly speaking, getting the money back would be the responsibility of the entity that made the error. And as far as accountability concerns, I mean, we bring the information to everyone's attention through our audit work, and then it would be the legislature that would, inquire with the
So
entity.
what's missing? So you find a problem, and we're trusting the agency to go hold someone else accountable for getting our money back. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes.
Sounds to me like we might need to fix something legislatively to hold agencies accountable for recovery. Because think of ourselves, if you owned a business or someone frauded your household. Let me just give an example. If your phone bill was overcharged for 12 months by $100 a month, that's $1,200. You'd sure as heck expect them to pay you back. And we're responsible for taxpayer dollars, so we probably need to find a way, Mr. Chairman, we probably need to find a way to hold agencies accountable to go back and collect the money, because it's not $1,200. It's potentially millions, tens of millions, or hundreds of millions annually in the state. Everyone's nodding, so I'm guessing that you guys agree maybe that would be a smart idea.
No, we're a legislative support agency, and so our role is really to provide information to you guys. And the Attorney General has issued opinions and made it very clear that legislative agencies do not have enforcement authority. So we just have to make sure that when we see something that's wrong, we can make that known to the Legislative Audit Committee, the legislature as a whole, and the public for that accountability.
Do y'all look, and I'm asking all four, because do y'all look for connections between the potential misappropriation or purposeful fraud between the person that did it or had control over it and the company that received the money, to see if there's a connection?
So on our audits that are contracting related, we do perform procedures to try to identify conflicts of interest. I will tell you that's not an easy thing to do. So we do what we can, but usually the most we can say is we didn't find any. We rarely could provide assurance that there aren't any.
Okay, same with you?
Yes, that's just a standard procedure on our contracting audits that we perform.
When you conduct an audit, what percentage of the time do you find problems? Like if you go into an agency, is there always something?
Usually. Occasionally there'll be, we won't find anything, but most of the time there's some kind of audit finding.
So when you find something, is it usually egregious and huge, or is it oftentimes really small and menial?
It's to varying degrees. So if you look at any of our performance audit reports, that's why we implemented our rating system. So green means pretty minor or nothing, and then it goes up to yellow, orange, and then our red is the most significant. That's what we call our priority issues.
What percentage are orange and red?
I don't have that number in front of me, but we can calculate
you guess?
that and get back to you.
Can you guess? Is it a large? Let me ask. Is it over 50%?
I don't think so.
Is it over 25%?
I think maybe.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Rodriguez Ramos.
Regarding fraud, and we talk about waste, fraud, and abuse, but those are really completely different things, right? And so you talked about the misappropriation of funds. Is a lot of that, well, let me step back. How do you, who determines the fraud, right? Because is that not an intent to deceive, right? And so that kind of puts it in a different bucket versus misappropriation. And it seems like there may be the allocation of funding over here or getting reimbursement for something. Maybe there was no intention there, right? It was just a misallocation or what have you. So at what point what factors are considered that, no, this is not just wasteful, they shouldn't have bought those flowers, or misuse or misappropriated, right? Like they shouldn't have gotten reimbursed for the whatever lunch, versus this person is really intending to deceive and make money off of this and hide. Like at what point do we make that differentiation that this is not just waste, this is actually fraud?
On all of our audit teams, we have a member of our investigations team who sits in on those meetings. And so that member is vital in those discussions to figure out if there is that criminal intent. And as been said, if we do determine that there is criminal intent, we will move to that matter from audit to investigations. But that is extremely rare. In the time I've been at the state auditor's office, it has not yet happened. It has just been misuse of funds rather than criminal intent. So the majority of our investigations come in from the criminal hotline and the fraud hotline.
Okay, and so that's why when you said we turn it over, because if it's a criminal element to it, that the prosecutorial piece of it is beyond your scope and
Yes.
you're focusing on the other parts. Okay, thank you, appreciate the clarification.
Representative Troxclair.
Sorry, I just keep coming up with more questions. I know we need to move on at some point, but y'all are just so fascinating. My question is, are vendors who make significant mistakes, and I understand, like I'm sure I've made a mistake in a data entry spreadsheet at some point too, but when it costs other people such significant amounts of money, is that vendor then prevented from future contracts with the state? I mean, when there are things of that magnitude, when it is a quarter of the total cost of the contract, what is being done? Because there should be some incentive for the vendor to ensure that those kinds of mistakes are not made.
So I'm going to punt that question to the comptroller's office. I know
Okay.
they're coming up later, but state
Okay.
agencies do have an obligation to report on vendor performance to their vendor performance tracking system. State agencies are supposed to consider that in entering in future contracts.
Okay. And then my last question, I promise, is universities. So you said that that you don't have jurisdiction, or you forward complaints to the university in question?
We have jurisdiction to audit universities, but when it comes to investigations, oftentimes we send the complaints to the university internal audit.
Okay.
To do that.
So you do perform audits of
Yes.
the universities, because we've talked about that previously. And in the investigations, then that's just up to the school of whether or not they want to pursue it. Do you think that they are generally pursued?
We follow up on matters that we think are serious enough to see what the outcome is and to see how they're moving along. So we do have a check in place.
And you're confident that they do move along?
You know, when we don't have primary jurisdiction over complaints, we do our best, and we hope that other entities are also doing their best.
And is that something that is, again, in state statute or just a internal decision, rulemaking?
You know, I'll have to get back to you when it comes to universities, but internal audit functions at universities do these investigations, and so they have that function. And since it is primarily their jurisdiction, that's why we refer them.
Okay. And is that common practice to have an entity of which the complaint is about to also handle the investigation? It seems like there's potential conflict of interest.
It could be. You know, if we did get for instance, a complaint about a DPS officer, we would have to forward that to the public integrity unit at the Rangers who work for DPS. So there could be, but that's, you know, the internal controls of that university or DPS in that instance. So.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Representative.
Y'all may have already said this earlier, but who are the current 6 members of, like, when y'all refer something to the legislative committee, who are those? Is it 3 from the House, 3 from the Senate?
So the Legislative Audit Committee is co-chaired by the Lieutenant Governor and the Speaker of the House. And then on the Senate side, it's the Chairman of Senate Finance, so currently Senator Huffman, and then another senator as determined by the Lieutenant Governor, currently Senator Nichols. And then on the House side, it's the Chair of House Appropriations, so Representative Bonin, and then the Chair of House Ways and Means, Representative Meyer.
Okay. And that is the 6-member committee that you've been referring to?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions, members? If not, just one little follow-up on your ability to audit only state dollars. So let's say there's, and you've done before some of the MCO big contracts, right? And Blue Cross Blue Shield is one of the latter ones. How do you know? Like, how do you know which was state dollars versus not? I mean, does that mean, do they have a segregated account with the Texas money, and then you can only look at what that money's done, but that money goes to administrative costs, administrative fees? Does that allow you then to go and see how administration is run and what those salaries were? I just don't know how you figure this out.
That is a really good question and a really difficult one to answer.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to start with the Blue Cross Blue Shield audit you mentioned, because that kind of illustrates. So all the money that they got through the state to provide Medicaid benefits to its members, those
Billions
were
of dollars.
All state dollars, yep. So we were able to look at all of that. But our primary audit finding in that audit was they started to commingle it when they were starting to claw back money from their PBM or from their pharmacy clients through their PBM, and that's what our audit finding is about, because once they started mixing everything together, they wouldn't provide us any evidence.
So in other words, they can stop an audit of tens of billions of dollars by simply commingling non-state dollars with state dollars.
So effectively, I would say that's what happened in that case. And I don't know if I would say they stopped the audit. I would say we hit a point where we could not, they were not willing to provide us the information about where the funds were commingled, and we didn't have authority to demand that any further, because it would require us to get records.
How much does the state, how much does Texas taxpayers pay Blue Cross Blue Shield in this case?
Oh, that's a little old. I'll have to go back and look.
Okay,
I
but
don't
billions,
remember. Yes.
billions of dollars.
Yes,
We're giving them billions
absolutely.
of dollars to do a service that they contracted out for, and then by commingling the funds, they say, hey, you can't look at it anymore.
That's what happened in that case.
Yeah. Well,
Now,
we're talking about that
certainly,
case, yeah.
I think HHSC took action as their contract was with HHSC, and as I understand it, HHSC has taken action to make sure they're set that expectation clearly for the MCOs that doesn't happen in the future.
So let's say they, again, we'll talk about Blue Cross Blue Shield because that's the least one. But let's say Blue Cross Blue Shield goes and spends something on some program, some directive, something we don't want, or is anti a policy position that we have, or just against the directive that we thought they were doing. Can you go and find that out, right? I mean, in other words, so let's say they go and they start some marketing program or whatever. Can you go there and see if our state money was used for that program, or can you not do that? Can you only look at the state dollars?
So we can only look at the state dollars, and I think, so obviously, like in that example, the MCOs earned some money, profit, so to speak, right? Because they wouldn't participate if they didn't, right? And at that point, those dollars are going to kind of lose their distinction as state dollars. And so how they spend that money that they earned, I don't think would be in our purview. Do you think that's a fair assessment? Okay.
Well, that's interesting. So then let's say, whatever, they have some margin, okay? So if they earned, let's say we gave them $1 billion, and they earned $100 million on that $1 billion, and they said, well, this is the money we earned, so we can do whatever we want with this. And there's nothing, you wouldn't be able to look at that $100 million because they said that that's the profit piece?
Likely no.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't like that. All right. Any other questions, members? All right. Thank you for your testimony. Appreciate it. All 5 of you.